The iMore Show is brought to you today by MailRoute. MailRoute is a service that just kills spam dead, kills viruses dead, stops bounced mail. It gets rid of everything that makes email annoying and unpleasant. It doesn't want you to waste your time. It doesn't want you to get a bunch of garbage in your email. All you have to do is go to... Where do you go? You go to http://mailroute.net/iMore. You get a free trial, 10% off for the lifetime of your account. If you are tired of dealing with spam and other assorted email grossness, just go to MailRoute. They'll fix you up. It is June 12, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to do a live Q&A for iOS 8 and OS X Yosemite. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, we have the managing editor of iMore.com and the kaiju of love, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Good. How you doing, Rene?
I was just telling you, I'm still tired from WWDC.
I know how you feel, man. You know, travel is not as easy as it used to be. I find that every year I get older, it takes like an additional week or so to fully recover from these things.
I measure it in bottles of Advil.
Yeah. You know, I think that. It's a very intense week, not only of learning, but also of social activity and networking and so on, and it takes its toll. It takes its toll.
We are no longer those in ages past worked trade shows and had fun, Peter.
Nope.
All right, so I am going to start pulling up the Q&A, but before we get to that, you've been using Yosemite for a little while. Just to be clear, the NDA is very different this year. Previously, we couldn't talk about unreleased software at all. This year, we can't do screenshots, we can't do videos, and we can't do reviews, which makes sense because the software is going to change, and we don't want to confuse anybody or give false hopes or false anger over anything. But we can talk about pretty much everything that they announced. So how's Yosemite treating you, Peter?
It is okay. It is a developer preview. It's not something that I would recommend for daily use, although I am using it daily and suffering the consequences. But it is exactly what Apple has promised. It is a new look for OS X that's cleaner, that's more consistent and integrated with iOS 7, which is nice to see. And there are lots of new features that I'm discovering and that I've learned about, because of the keynote last week.
Yeah, so what's interesting to me is that there have been all these takes on continuous computing or ubiquitous computing over the years, ever since the early days of Scott McNealy and Son or Larry Ellison and Oracle, and more recently Google, Larry Page and Eric Schmidt. There's been this idea of thin client where everything would be in the cloud and it would just push down to all of these basically shell devices that you'd use. And more recently, Microsoft has been doing this thing where it's just, once again, it's all about Windows everywhere, where they're taking the same Metro, can't call it Metro UI, and just pushing that on everywhere from Windows Phone to Surface to Windows 8 computers with touchscreens and all basically looking and acting the same. And Apple's doing it very differently. They're not doing a single store of truth in the cloud. They're not trying to put the same interface on every device. They're doing almost the opposite. They're making it not matter what interface you have, what device you have, and they're making the cloud almost disappear. They're just moving your activities from one place to another.
Indeed. Now the device that you're using is becoming less important than the overall workflow itself. So once iOS 8 and Yosemite are out in the world, it's going to make it much easier for you to travel between devices, which is great because there have been so many times where I've started out an email on my iPad and then I want to finish it on my Mac, or you're stuck on the iPhone with something and would much rather do it somewhere else. That stuff is all going to come to pass when iOS 8 and Yosemite are finally out in the world.
I was talking to our videographer Anthony about this, and he's always had the dream, most recently encapsulated by Ubuntu Phone and Ubuntu OS, where basically you carry one brain around with you, your phone, and you put that down and it becomes your computer. And I think that's a beautiful dream, but I think that we're still too constrained for that to happen. The resources in an iMac or a MacBook Pro are still so far beyond a phone that you probably wouldn't have a great experience with the constrained RAM and constrained resources in a mobile device. So I kind of like the fact that Apple is letting each device be that device with all the resources it can bring to bear, and it's basically just task shifting things around.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a better understanding of the way that these devices work, really. And instead of one device to rule them all, like the One Ring, it's understanding how to get the most out of each of the devices that you use, and also sort of a gestalt, where the sum of the devices and the sum of the operating systems that are running them is greater than the individual parts themselves.
I think that's very true, and I think I'm interested to see just how far we can go with this. And I think the technology in general, I mean, the idea of just moving your phone calls around, an AirDrop that works seamlessly, tethering that works seamlessly, sort of. I don't want to call it a compromise, but I think it's an incredibly pragmatic approach, and I think that's true of a lot of the things we saw last week.
Yeah, I think that is too. I think that. We're seeing, for the first time, I think, in a number of years, we're seeing an overall shift in Apple's focus to creating a more holistic sort of environment for these devices. They created the iPhone in 2007, and they had to really kind of backfill a developer environment around it. Initially we were going to make web apps, and that was going to be enough. But Apple eventually relented on that and ended up creating a very robust developer environment. And we've seen iOS mature in fits and starts since then, and in major releases since then. And it took another big leap forward when the iPad was released in 2010, and now we're seeing. I don't want to really call it a singularity because it's not, but we're seeing continuity, which is the word that Apple uses to describe how these things work together, and it's a very interesting evolution.
Friends of the show, Jason Snell and Matt Drance, in their pieces said that they dropped the bomb. They said this would not have happened under Steve Jobs, and I find that really interesting in a number of ways because, first of all, and they both admitted that it's hard to get you can't just encapsulate everything in a generality, and there were things that Steve Jobs did, like iTunes on Windows. He said, no, screw you guys, and Apple did it anyway, in spite of him not wanting to do it. And he was mercurial and capricious, and he changed his mind on things like video on the iPhone, on the iPod, and iBooks, and a whole bunch of things. He just changed his mind. So I don't know if it would or wouldn't have happened under Steve Jobs. I don't know if maybe they would have built continuity and built Extensibility, and he or Scott Forstall would have just said no and vetoed it and not let them push it out, or if they would have said, we have to do this, and he would have said, fine, screw yourselves. If you fail, don't come crying to me. But there is really this sense of almost fresh air in the room of it being a new time and a new place and new energy and excitement.
Well, I don't think that that's anything new either. I think that we've been seeing Tim Cook and his other senior executives who have been working with him closely leading that charge for quite some time now. We saw it when Apple started issuing dividends. Jobs famously followed Warren Buffett's advice on dividends and didn't see what the point was of, somebody having $100 worth of Apple stock somehow being, or I should say it the other way around, that somebody having 9 shares of $10 Apple stock was somehow better than somebody having 1 share of $100 stock. I think that's paraphrasing what Buffett said, but anyway, the point being, we've seen Apple issue dividends as well. So Apple, early on, after Steve Jobs passed, really started speaking more the language that investors had wanted them to speak for a very long time. And now we're seeing that come to fruition in the way that these products are getting developed. The interesting thing for me is not just what's happening on the software front, but how this is going to affect Apple's hardware strategy going into the second half of the year and beyond, because we've seen no appreciable hardware from Apple, notwithstanding the very mild updates to MacBook Airs that happened a couple of months ago. So it makes me wonder how things are going to coalesce further when we hear about new hardware coming from Apple later this year.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting in that we didn't hear anything specific. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, as far as new MacBook Pros go, or as far as a new Mac Mini goes, or a bump to the iMac or a bump to the Mac Pro, there was nothing announced at WWDC that changes what I think those machines would be.
Right, exactly. There's nothing in there that would dramatically affect that, but some of what's in there may give us an indication of how things are going to go in the future, and that's certainly very interesting.
Well, the stuff that, and this has been talked to death already because we're 2 weeks out of WWDC, but the stuff that was really interesting is stuff that, and you never know with Apple because some stuff is planned and some stuff is just happenstance. I mean, they have technologies in place and they figure out clever ways to use them sometimes rather than pre-planning that technology to get them to a certain space, and that's just how every business works. But there's an array of technology now, and we saw things like, well, they did constraint-based layout, which has a horrible marketing name of auto layout earlier. They are now doing scalable storyboards in Xcode. So instead of making a pixel-perfect iPhone or iPad, you can make a small horizontal thing or a small vertical thing, and that could lead eventually to devices that could be of any size or shape, or apps that could be run side by side without inflexible layout conditions. Or they have the extensibility now, which is headless apps, which means that remote views can be run without dependency on the host app. So you don't have to have this big hoggy Facebook app consuming all your memory. You can just have a light, little daemon running a light remote view, and that could portend a whole new wave of iPod, iWatch / wearable devices. Everything from bigger iPhones to smaller wearable devices. A lot of the technology that makes sense for those seems to have been enabled.
Exactly.
So that, yeah, in that sense, yeah, I'm excited about the future too, Peter. But that's probably September, October stuff. I mean, I don't think Apple's going to drop any of that in a press release this week.
No, there's no indication that Apple is, and I wouldn't expect it to happen just quite yet. Apple has it in its best interest to sort of backload the second half of the year with hardware announcements because that's when people buy hardware. If you take a look at Apple's sales over the course of years, a lot more people buy hardware in the second half of the year than they do in the first. So nothing really unusual there.
And the thing that I think is important to remember is that hardware specifically is planned years out. People are working now on the hardware we'll see next year and the year after that already.
That's right.
And the hardware that we're going to see 3 years from now already exists on Apple in boards, in locked rooms. It's a long process, and things like, now we're going to get a bigger iPhone. Well, no, I mean the conditions are now in place. Also, early big phones like early LTE phones had problems. The LTE phones had bad battery life. The big phones had to use pen-tile displays and all sorts of not great screen technology. But now, hopefully, we can. One of the things that, and I'm going on a total tangent here, but it's easy to make small runs of certain gadgets. Like if you're only making a few phones, even a few million phones, to make 100 million phones is really hard. It took Apple until last year to make 2 runs. They can make the iPhone 5C and the 5S in the same year, but now they can do multiple phones. They've got better panel technology. They've got a market, I think, that is primed for bigger stuff. So all of the stuff, I did an article about this yesterday called Timing. I think Apple is a patient company and an audacious company, and that results in them often having pretty good timing.
I think you're right. And I think that as a question of scale, I'm not sure that Apple really did anything that was that out of the ordinary with the 5C and the 5S yesterday compared to what some of their competitors can do. But they take their own time about it, and they make sure to get it right the first time, which saves them a lot of problems that some of their competitors seem to have over and over again.
All right, so I'm going to gently ease us into questions. The first one is from Adam, and he says, in iOS 7, when searching using Spotlight for a message, once the message is found and you click on it, iOS takes you to the message, but to the most recent part of the thread, not necessarily a part of the thread you saw in the search results. So when you search and find something, you may have to scroll. Is this fixed in iOS 8? That's a kind of a really specific question, and iOS 8 is in such a beta state now that I don't think you can take anything as being fixed in iOS 8 yet. That's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, fair enough. I haven't used iOS 8 yet. I'm still paying all my attention to Yosemite.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe if you click it and it works, it's fixed. Maybe if you click it and it don't, it's just because it's a beta. So that kind of stuff, I think it's too early to tell. Robert wants to know, and this is actually one of the more interesting things that I like about iOS 8. I recently read an article that talks about iOS 8 blocking customer location. So what basically was talking about is iOS 8 does MAC address randomization. So if you're just walking around and you're not connected to a Wi-Fi network, it randomly broadcasts a MAC address, not your real MAC address, so that Wi-Fi hotspots near you just get that random address. They don't get your actual MAC address. And this is important because whether you consider it unscrupulous or not, there's a lot of companies like businesses and shopping malls and other stores that track people based on MAC address. Oh, Peter was at Starbucks here. Now Peter was at JCPenney's here. Now he's at Target here. And they can track you because the device in your pocket is telling them uniquely who you are. And if you ever worked in marketing, for retailers, you know that once they have a unique ID, they can pretty much figure out everything about you. So Apple is deliberately throwing them off the scent. Now, Peter, first of all, I love this feature.
Yeah, it's a nice bit of user anonymity, and it's about time.
Because I know, mutual friend Andy Anako on MacBreak Weekly was saying that he really dislikes the idea of being tracked when he shops, and he would go so far as to put his phone in, one of those little metal bags, create a cage so that you couldn't follow him. This, I think, is once again, Apple doesn't make their money off user data, at least not yet, so they're in a position to make it a differentiator and to make it sort of quote-unquote expensive for competitors to not do it.
Mm-hmm.
So his question is Apple actually doing this to protect our privacy, or do you think they're doing it to force retailers to adopt iBeacon?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think that they're doing it to force I think that no, I don't think they're doing it to force iBeacon. That's a happy coincidence that iBeacon fixes the problem, as it were, but ultimately it's doing what they can to protect users, I think, more than anything.
I mean, iBeacon is Bluetooth based, so within 30 feet iBeacon can register you. I don't know if it immediately gets unique identifier. It might. Apple makes it easy to turn off iBeacon if you don't want it in the settings. So you can make yourself a little black box. You can turn off Wi-Fi too, of course, but it might be less than convenient if you're at an Apple store, you're at a Starbucks, and you don't want to use data. You want to use Wi-Fi. That is an interesting question. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. But I think Apple, at the very least, has made privacy and security such a forward-facing, such a customer-facing issue that they deserve a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Not that I would ever trust any company at all, ever.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. Scrolling. Are you guys going to watch the World Cup? Yes.
No, because I'm American.
No, because Americans watch the World Cup, Peter.
Not real Americans, not #Merca Americans. No, just kidding.
You watch good football?
Yeah, I'll probably watch some of it, just not right this second, no.
All right, Rob wants to know, and actually I don't have a good answer for this either. Will Handoff work with older Macs that have Bluetooth 2.x rather than Bluetooth 4.0?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So Handoff uses Bluetooth LE. At least they talk about it using Bluetooth LE.
Right.
And not all Macs have Bluetooth LE. They don't have Bluetooth 4.0. They have older versions like Bluetooth 2.0.
Right, or Bluetooth 2.1, etc. Yeah, 4.0 has been standard issue on Macs for the last year or two. But unfortunately, I think this is going to leave a lot of older Macs out of the list here. I did a preliminary list, or I put together a preliminary list, and like I said, if you've got a Mac that's been made within the last couple of years, you should be all set if you're not sure whether you got Bluetooth 4.0 or not.
So there are sort of I don't know what the right word is. There are certain allowances made for backwards compatibility in Bluetooth LE, but it depends on the features being used. And for example, it might not be just Bluetooth LE dependent. AirDrop also does ad hoc Wi-Fi to transfer large files, and so does Handoff. And it's quite possible the radio in your Wi-Fi is going to have to support that feature, and older Macs might not support that either. So I think unless and until Apple provides a list of which features are available, it's going to be hard to know for sure. I wouldn't count on it, though. I mean, if it is available on older Macs with older versions of Bluetooth and older versions of Wi-Fi, I think that would be a lucky happenstance, or just awesome. But I don't think you can count on it.
Right.
All right, Jose, why all this talk of Bing? I know they don't like Google, but they also don't like Microsoft. So why not use the better search, Peter? Why not use the better search?
The better search here being Google rather than Bing.
I guess in Jose's opinion.
Well, who cares? You can still use Google if you want to. And you know, Apple's showing off Bing right now. Apple showed off Bing at WWDC, but that doesn't preclude you from using Google.
Well, it does in their partner services. So I think in Siri and also in Spotlight, they're going to direct web queries to Bing. And I don't think you have a choice. I think you still have a choice in Safari, but not in their packaged services.
We'll see. You know, I mean, bottom line is it's in Apple's interest right now to push people towards Bing, not Google.
And also, and there's a couple answers to this too. I think Google was paying Apple over the years billions and billions of dollars in revenue for, I don't know if you can call it affiliate revenue or referral revenue or whatever it's termed, but for directing people to Google and letting Google show them ads and things. That was hugely valuable to Google, and they paid Apple a lot of money for it. We don't know if, for example, Microsoft has offered them more money, because that's just how business works. You know, if Microsoft says, screw what Google's giving you, we'll give you double. If I'm Apple, I'm like, yay, double is more than half.
Well, you know, I think that that's just how business works is kind of the answer to the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the one thing I did think interesting though, Peter, is when you go to private browsing now in Safari, I don't know if they auto switch you, but the demo showed you going to DuckDuckGo instead of Google.
Yes, and that's very interesting too, because DuckDuckGo, I'm not sure that DuckDuckGo would, you know, benefit materially from that, but DuckDuckGo it famously, of course, does not record any tracking information about you for the search. So, you know, people who are more interested in maintaining online anonymity may be better off with that.
True. All right, I'm going to take a short break before we continue and just thank one of our other sponsors, and that is Backblaze. It is $5 a month. It is unlimited. It is unthrottled. It is uncomplicated. It is available anywhere, and you can try it for free. No credit card required. All you have to do is go to backblaze.com/iMore and sign up. And Peter, I know you've written a little bit about Backblaze. My own personal experience is there is no such thing as too many backups.
Yeah, indeed. Backblaze, if you're already using Time Machine and you're saying, well, why would I need Backblaze? I think the answer is because you can, as Rene, you just said, never have too many backups. You know, it's nice to have something on-site that you can recover from quickly, but it's even better to have something off-site in case something catastrophic should happen, like your house burns down or your computer fails altogether and needs to be replaced, and somehow in the process your Time Machine backup is taken with it.
See, I was not using Backblaze because I feared the small bandwidth caps and huge overage charges of my Canadian ISP, but they've gotten much better lately. And I've had 3 SSD failures in a row. When I was doing Talk Mobile, we lost a bunch of videos because I had the hard drive fail, the drive in my computer fail, and the drive of someone who had a second copy of that fail all within a few days, and it just totally wrecked us. But if that had been nicely online in a backup service, I could have just downloaded it. So now I am making sure that all of that stuff is in an online service so I can get to it again.
Good plan.
So again, no add-ons, no gimmicks, no additional charges. It's founded by ex-Apple engineers. It runs natively on the Mac. There's an iOS app, so you can access any of those files. Best of all, there's a 15-day trial. No credit card required. Just enter an email address and a password, and you are up and running. Go to www.backblaze.com/iMore now, and give yourself that safety net. You deserve it. Your data is important. All right, more questions. Peter, I don't know how many more questions you can take, but I'm going to throw some more at you anyway.
Go for it.
Joseph wants to know, I've read things about third-party keyboards. I guess he's talking about the third-party keyboard support in iOS 8, not being able to draw above the top row of the keyboard. Could you elaborate? So my guess is the standard iOS keyboard stops at the top row. There's no additional rows. Some apps like Tweetbot, Twitter clients, other apps, famously add their extra rows on top of that. Those may or may not work in iOS 8, but Apple's got their new predictive row above there. So when you're typing, if it's enabled, and you can enable it and disable it just by using the same little globe button you use for emoji, it will put predictive typing results in there. And I don't know if Apple's going to keep that for them or if that's open to third parties or not. Do you care a lot about the extended things being put in or do you care about a lot about custom keyboards, Peter?
Yeah, I'm really interested in giving, SwiftKey and other products like that a try when they're available. I've been interested in alternate keyboards for quite some time, and up until now, it's something that you've either had to live with incredible limitations to use, or you've had to jailbreak your Mac in order to get it working. So it'll be nice to see how that's going to work. Extensibility, just in general, is probably one of the most fascinating parts of iOS 8 for me, because it's the sort of thing that could really change things for the way that people use their devices.
I agree completely, and I like the way Apple's implementing it, because everything stays local. Like Apple's keyboard, the predictive text is local. The database and knowledge base is built up on the device. It's not shared with the cloud. And that's the same thing for third-party keyboards, although some of them do a lot of crunching on the cloud. So they can ask permission, and you can enable that permission, and then they can go to the cloud. The concern here is keylogging, of course, which has been a problem on computers for a long time, them basically reading the stuff that you type on your keyboard. But I think certainly big names like SwiftKey and Swipe, we probably have nothing to worry about with them.
Let us hope.
Do you have any particular keyboard? I mean, I've used SwiftKey, I've used Swipe. Swipe is very fast, but when I'm walking, I find the bouncing motion stops the continuous keyboard entry that Swipe is really good at, and then I kind of default back to SwiftKey, which just had really good prediction. But I'm going to have to try them side by side with Apple's new keyboard to see what really works for me.
Yes, not having iOS 8 installed anywhere, I'm not prepared to comment yet. But
you will not confirm or deny.
I shall not confirm nor deny.
Yeah, and none of them are available yet. They're going to have to. And one of the other questions we had, and I don't know if we discussed this last week or not, is I'm not sure how that's all going to work, because we have all this legacy app management ideas. And like you download SwiftKey. What does a SwiftKey app look like? What is inside it? Like, it's going to manifest in other apps. When you delete it, do they give you a warning saying, "Warning, deleting this will remove SwiftKey from all the other apps"? I mean, I'm just not sure how that'll work yet.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like you said, it remains to be seen. I mean, part of the problem about speculating on this stuff right now is that it's early in beta. Not all features are there yet.
Yeah, and it does kind of show me that no matter how new iOS feels, it does have these legacy things. Like, we have all these preconceptions about what an app is, how to download them, how to delete them, how to re-download them, and the system is now going to a point where we'll have apps that are maybe just widgets, or maybe just notifications, or maybe just keyboards. And despite how young mobile is, we're going to be old mobile men and women.
Yes, indeed. We should be prepared to break with old paradigms, though.
Yeah, we are, but then at the same time, they're giving us iCloud Drive, which is sort of, again, it's not exactly analogous to the Finder, but it's an older paradigm that they waited a long time to reintroduce to iOS. So it's a weird world.
Everything old is new again.
Well, I understand. So there's this thing that goes to, way back when the Mac was first. I don't know if this is a true story or not, but I heard that they didn't put arrow keys on it at first because they didn't want people just porting over terminal apps. They didn't want people to just have, command line interfaces. So they got rid of the arrow keys to force developers to make apps that would use a mouse. And the analog of that is Apple didn't introduce a lot of traditional computer metaphors to the iPhone. They sort of put the iPhone out there and then waited to see, and then added back the things that they realized, no, we really can't do without this. It's not that something better is going to present itself. We need this, regardless if it's cut and paste or cloud drive or whatever. And it's interesting to see some of those computer metaphors still went out.
Yes, indeed.
Are you going to be interested? Are you going to be using the cloud drive, Peter? Are you going to be glad to have some form of file system?
I absolutely am. This is going to solve a lot of problems for me, and I think it's even going to save me money, because I'm spending money on application sync software that I'm not going to have to use anymore once iCloud Drive is in the world.
The other thing that was interesting to me was mail drop, which basically, because I've run into this, you have a large amount of attachments, you want to email them somebody, and you get an error saying their mail does not support whatever, 20 megabytes, 30 megabytes. And now Apple's doing this interesting thing that's I believe they said it's transparent for Apple users, but for everyone else it'll give them a download link. But essentially you add your video or your photos to Mail. If it's too big, Mail will convert those into an iCloud document and send a secure download link. Or basically send them in parallel. So the mail goes through the mail server, the file goes through Apple's encrypted iCloud server, and they rendezvous again at the end.
Exactly right.
So that means, literally, Peter, I could email you Godzilla.
Yeah, exactly, and Godzilla on Blu-ray at that. You could you could send me a very big file, and I'd be able to download it in some way. I think that the downside of this is that you're going to become more dependent on having enough space in your iCloud drive to be able to do everything that you want to. So you are going to be spending more money with Apple each month in order to make that happen. You know, people are going to find that the 5 gigs that they get with their basic iCloud membership is just not satisfactory after they start. You know, people are already finding that, you know, as they have to back up their iPhone and then their iPad, not have to, but start backing up their iPhone and their iPad, or store photos in Photo Stream and so on. So this is just going to exacerbate people's file storage needs in the cloud. So it's one more feature or service to get dependent on from Apple that is going to cost you a little bit more money. But if you're like me and you're already using Dropbox and you're already using SugarSync or something else, you may end up saving money in the long term.
So that's where I'm not clear, because I believe they said you could use up to 5 gigabyte or 6 gigabyte files. I don't remember for sure which one it was. But they introduced this idea of ephemerality into iCloud files, so I don't know if that document persists or if that's counted against your storage. Can someone perpetually download that from iCloud, like a month from now, a year from now? Is that link still there? In iMessage now, you have to say, no, I want to keep this, and then iCloud will download a local copy. Otherwise, it'll expire after a few days, and that would be interesting, because that means you wouldn't be cluttering up your drive with a ton of big files.
Right.
Another question.
Well, the one thing about that iCloud drive is copying files, or is making local copies of those files on your hard drive. So the effect that you're seeing is pretty immediate. You know, you're seeing these files appear and they're instantly accessible on your drive, right?
Yeah.
You know, so it's taking up space on your drive as well. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that works. It'll be interesting to learn.
Shiraz wants to know, does Notification Center stay open while you're working, or does it slide off the current behavior of Mavericks? So this I've seen a couple questions about, because previously we had Dashboard, and you could just go to Dashboard as a second screen, use the calculator, use the weather widget, do anything you want, and then slide back, where Notification Center seems more transient. You know, it's there for a second and gone. Do you think that will fundamentally alter how people use widgets?
I'm not sure because, I mean, you know, ostensibly the reason why Apple is incorporating widgets into Notification Center is to give widgets a different place to live than Dashboard. Dashboard isn't deprecated, but Dashboard seems to be a no man's land. And it's really interesting because I've asked people on Twitter, just as a straw poll, before how they use Dashboard, and many users never use Dashboard at all, never even opened it, have actually gone out of their way in some cases to deactivate it. But bottom line is, Dashboard widgets are not part of their routine for whatever reason. Notification Center is an attempt, I think, to make that sort of extensibility within the operating system a little bit more exposed and a little easier to access than Dashboard is. And so, you know, the bottom line is I don't really have a good answer right now. But the sort of stuff that you can do with Notification Center today isn't the sort of stuff that would require Notification Center to stay open for any extended duration. You can do stuff like social media, which you can do with Notification Center now. It's, you know, it's a little sexier, a little better in Yosemite. Open up a calculator and so on. But Craig Federighi, in demonstrating it last week, also showed stuff like, I think, ESPN Sports Center, and maybe even eBay or something like that, and those functions haven't been exposed yet in the developer preview. So, you know, how that works into third-party development will be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think so. It brings back that whole discussion about the nature of widgets to begin with, and we've had this debate for years because, you know, especially Android has had widgets for a long time, and it's interesting when very similar to Dashboard, they become a place you go to on the home screen. It's really pull interface. You have to go and look for them and find them, much like you do an app. The opposite is an interactive notification, something that pushes to you to wherever you are and lets you do a brief bit of information. What Apple's doing with Notification Center is they're making these widgets sort of nearline. They're not being pushed to you, but you don't have to go and pull them. They're just available anywhere. So if I'm in an app, I don't have to leave and go to the home screen. If I'm playing a game, I don't have to exit it and go to the home screen. I can just pull down Notification Center. If I'm on my Mac typing, I don't have to go over to Dashboard to see them. I can just pull across Notification Center. And it's a very subtle difference, but it seems like a very profound difference to me. And it does sort of play into the strengths or the idea that widgets are glanceable or very transient in nature.
Yes, indeed.
But I don't use, like, I will use Calculator once a month maybe on Dashboard. I don't really use it for anything else. I don't know how I'm going to use Notification Center yet.
You know, there are dashboard widgets that I use just by reflex. I don't use Calculator that often. I sometimes might, especially when it's expense report time. But other stuff that I do use more frequently are conversion calculations, which you can now do in Sherlock, which is really kind of cool.
You keep calling Spotlight Sherlock just because they Sherlock.
Did I Sherlock? Did I call it Sherlock again? I did that
Freudian
last week
slap.
too.
Freudian
I know
slap.
it really is. It's funny too because I make the point I defend Apple's development of Spotlight as not Sherlocking apps that it may have, like Quicksilver, Spotlight, or LaunchBar, or whatever. I mean, LaunchBar or Alfred. But you can do conversions in Spotlight, which is really kind of cool now. And I'm expecting other widgets to pop up that people will find interesting uses for. I'm really curious to see how third-party developers end up using that space in Yosemite, because Notification Center is going to, I think, become an increasingly important part of people's daily workflow.
One of the things I saw that was really interesting, I don't know how this applies to extensibility, is that for Handoff, on iOS, of course, you have to be in the App Store, but on the Mac, it says either in the App Store or signed by a registered developer.
Yeah, that's good. That's good news for developers who sort of bulk at sandboxed applications. More and more developers, and it isn't a huge groundswell, but significant developers have left the Mac App Store because they can't deal with Apple's policies regarding applications in the Mac App Store needing to be sandboxed. So that at least leaves the door open for those developers to participate in a handoff workflow, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, most recently, most famously, Coda can't put the next version of Coda into the Mac App Store. But
Panic.
Theoretically with this, Panic, sorry. Theoretically with this, I could still do handoff between Diet Coda on the iPad and Coda on the Mac, even though it's not in the App Store.
Exactly.
Which is not the usual approach Apple takes when it comes to their own APIs.
Which really makes you wonder long-term what their plans are for the Mac App Store. Are they going to loosen up their sandboxing restrictions? That'd be nice.
Well, I wonder if a lot of technology we're seeing now, because Apple's been trying to do extensibility for many years, and they had problems. They had problems with the security model, and they had problems with things like, if Facebook.app is running and you have an interactive Facebook notification and Facebook.app is being a resource hog and it gets jettisoned, what happens to the remote view? That disappears too. But now Apple's got every extensibility is in its separate container. So if you have the Facebook app, the Facebook widget, and the Facebook interactive notification, all of those are contained separately. So they could jettison Facebook. It doesn't have anything to do with the widget or the notification. And I wonder if there might be something, sort of how like CloudKit, which is a key value in Blob Store, sort of superseded core data sync. I wonder if we'll get some new technology that will make sandboxing the way it exists now no longer matter, and we'll be able to have both secure apps in the Mac App Store.
Oh, from your lips to Craig Federighi's ears.
Well, he gives me hope because he does seem to skew a lot geekier than past administrations.
It's true. Not only geekier, but more conciliatory towards geeks too, and towards long-suffering developers. I likened him last week to sort of a combination of Oprah and Santa Claus. And you've got an API, and you've got an API, and we've all got APIs. 4,000 new APIs and lots of new stuff to understand. But many developers came out of the keynote last week kind of scratching their heads and going, wow, I don't have anything left to complain about Apple or complain about Apple to.
Give them a week.
Yeah, exactly. Give them a week. They're probably starting to come up with a new list already.
So in the chat room, they are discussing iCloud Keychain and what it means for apps like 1Password and Touch ID APIs and what that means as well. iCloud Keychain for me. I mean, I know some people take an issue with the fact that it uses a less secure or an RSA compromised encryption. At least it did on iOS 7, and that was before anyone knew that it was an RSA compromised encryption. Beyond that, I still don't use it because I like the idea of a master password. You know, Peter and I have both had incidents recently where someone wanted to use our phone because they were either locked out or they had a problem or something, and I unlocked my phone and gave it to them. And if I was using iCloud Keychain, they would then have access to all of my website logins and all of my credit cards. With one password, they have to put in a long, strong password to get, you know, past the phone and into that stuff. So I was interested if Apple would do anything there, and they haven't. But I'm no longer sure whether the solution is a master password for iCloud Keychain or a guest mode for iOS like they have in OS X, where you can boot just into Safari or just into the phone, which would sort of be an extension of the lock screen technology we already have.
Yeah, maybe I'm silly or naive, but I do use iCloud Keychain, and I use it because of its convenience factor more than anything else. I understand that it's not perfect technology, but nothing is perfect technology, and I assume that, you know, nothing that I'm doing with my devices is really that vital enough to merit a huge amount of protection. But I do what I can, you know, using secure passwords and rotating my passwords frequently. So doing that stuff makes it easier for me to use iCloud Keychain because iCloud Keychain makes it easier to do that stuff. Admittedly, though, it's not a perfect solution. I hope Apple continues to improve it, and I know that they will.
So my problem right now is after Heartbleed and GoToFail, I changed all my password. I used the Watchtower feature in 1Password, found all my, you know, all the possible compromised passwords, changed them all, and I gave myself a 20-character pseudo-random blob for an Apple ID, thinking, you know, it'll never be a problem. I'll just cut and paste it from 1Password whenever I need it. And now I've been setting up a lot of new devices, and I've had to laboriously find a second device, log into 1Password, and copy it out, often erroneously the first couple times.
There you go. Yeah, that's it. Becomes password management is still a hideous problem for many, many people.
So that brings us to Touch ID, and the question Socrollet and Sybil in the chat room were talking about is Touch ID for apps like 1Password. And AgileBits has put up a blog post saying they're looking into all these things, extensibility, so you can autofill your passwords, Touch ID, all the new toys. The thing I like about Touch ID is the question was always, how do you secure the token? Because Touch ID was all hardware-based. It was in the secure enclave of the Apple A7 processor, and all it would do was release a yes/no token. But you release that to a developer, and some jerk will figure out a way to take advantage of it. So what Apple did that I really liked is they included it in Keychain, Peter. So the yes/no token goes straight to Keychain, and then Keychain unlocks for you, and that keeps it all in a very secure Apple pipe, unless and until it fills a password the way it would for you anyway, which I thought was a good solution.
Seems to be a good solution, absolutely.
And Keychain is something I think people understand, and like you mentioned, it's easy, it just works, and making a system the same is always a win, I think.
I think it is, too.
All right, next question. How will family sharing handle content from multiple Apple IDs?
This is the $50,000 question. I don't know. Do you?
No, so based only upon the keynote, what they were saying at the keynote, is it sounds like it's credit card based. So as long as all of those Apple IDs have the same credit card, maybe it'll work. I mean, right now, if you all have the same Apple ID, you don't have this problem because you're all using each other's logins anyway. And I think you have 5 devices on iTunes and 10 devices on iCloud that can all share media already. So that feels like that's already been solved. The problem is, you know, maybe Peter doesn't want the same Apple ID as his son because they have to share backup space, or he doesn't want, you know, they have different musical tastes, and now Peter's Genius recommendations are incredibly, you know, multi-personality disordered, and that's a problem where unique Apple IDs could solve it because, you know, Peter, I think you have 3 children.
That's right. Yeah.
You, your wife, your children could all have separate Apple IDs, all enjoy the same, you know, your independent iCloud storage, independent iCloud backup, independent Find My iPhone stuff, all of that. But if they're all on the same credit card and all have the same billing address, you know, thanks to the good graces of Hollywood, whatever, you could still share all the stuff that any of you bought on all those accounts. Plus, because it's your card, your kids, maybe even your wife, would have to ask you before they can do in-app purchases.
Yeah, and you see, that's the part that's got me kind of stuck because, like, in my house, you know, my wife and I have use separate Apple IDs and separate separate credit cards to do those transactions. So I don't think family sharing is going to work for us too well. But with the kids, it's a different story. That could definitely work out much better than it does now.
Yeah, and I hope there is, like, for example, if the parents have the same credit card, one parent don't have to ask the other parent, or partner, family member, whatever, to use a credit card. So I hope that you can set that up. Like, there'll be permission settings saying these IDs need to ask permission to do stuff, these IDs don't, because you should let adults be adults and all that.
Exactly, it'd make more sense.
So we're gonna have to wait to see more on that. Are we going to be able to do AirPlay mirroring from iOS to the Mac, or am I hallucinating?
AirPlay mirroring? What? Why would you want to?
Well, maybe you have a giant iMac. You have a 27-inch iMac, and you're watching something on your iPhone. And you just want to beam it to that glorious IPS display.
Okay. Hallucinating? I don't know. Is that functionality exposed right now?
It is. So this is my question, and we haven't heard anything about this, and I wonder if Apple's waiting for their fall events for this. Apple announced a bunch of apps that Handoff works with. It's the ones you'd expect. It's the iWork apps. It's email. Mail.apps, Safari, Address Book. All the bread and butter apps. They didn't say anything about media. So, for example, I can easily imagine. Peter's listening to his playlist on his iMac, picks up his iPhone to go pick up a kid from school. His playlist just continues seamlessly on his iPhone. That's a very easy to imagine use case. What if Peter is gaming? He's playing whatever the latest hot game is, and it's on the Mac App Store and the iOS App Store. Why can't he pick up his phone, start walking away, and the game, same level, same place, just transitions to iPhone? There's all sorts of capabilities. Peter comes home. I keep using you as an example, Peter, because you're in the room. Peter comes home. Peter's watching something on his Apple TV. He gets up to leave, and the movie switches to his iPhone. Right now, if you started it on your iPhone and AirPlayed it to your Apple TV, you can turn off AirPlay, and it'll go back to your iPhone. But if you started on the Apple TV, you can't send it to your iPhone. You have to go and find the app and hope it remembers your location and keep playing from that point. So there's all sorts of areas that I think Handoff, and maybe even Mac to iPad streaming, because there is a continuous streaming API for Handoff. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff Apple could do when they've had time.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Does that interest you at all, being able to hand off games or media or stuff like that?
Well, we've seen, the preliminary sort of structure for it exist already in Game Center, right? With the Game Center aware applications, games can save their states, save games in the cloud, and then you can pick up those games on other devices. But so far, it's very operating system dependent. So, you can do that on iOS, for example, and we've seen that in similar functionality appear on the Mac as well. Steam really has. Valve has it very worked out with Steam and Steam Play, so you can you play a game on one computer, save what you're doing, quit, start up on another computer using the same user ID, and just keep going from where you were at before. And I think that there is definitely a place for it. The question is crossing that bridge from iOS to OS X. Where is that going to make sense? Because many of the iOS versions of games are not the same games. They may be based on or inspired by or even very rough conversions of their PC counterparts, but there's still a big disparity between the two of them. So just looking at it from a data standpoint, I'm not exactly sure what the load would be on developers to try to make sure that there's parity there, or whether that even makes sense. What does make sense to me, though, is some of the other stuff that Apple's doing that they didn't really talk about at the keynote. Like, if I understand right, there is some new MFI game controller connectivity that gets handed off to the Mac as well. We'll see how this stuff develops, but it's very interesting to see how Apple deals with this going forward, because Apple has, for a very long time, at least in my opinion, been somewhat tone deaf to games. Games make up a huge, in fact, the biggest single component of the App Store, and for that matter, the Mac App Store as well. But it doesn't seem like Apple has always been very responsive to what game developers specifically want out of the platform. And we saw kind of a sea change there at WWDC this year with Metal, which is a new technology that Apple's introducing in iOS 8 that dramatically, in some cases, increases the performance of graphics, which of course is key for games. I'd love to see more of that stuff propagate out to OS X as well, because you can run the same game on OS X and Windows on the exact same hardware. Take the same Mac, take the same MacBook Pro, put Windows 7 on or Windows 8, and end up with a game that runs significantly faster than it will under OS X. And all that's got to do with OpenGL overhead and the way that Apple handles its drivers. So.
Yeah, their drivers are key to scientific stuff, not to gaming.
Not to gaming, right. I don't think that that's a change that we're going to see in Yosemite, but maybe in OS X Weed or whatever comes after it.
I'd love to see Metal on OS X. I'd love to see Metal on the Apple TV. I'd love to see Metal everywhere. Like Federici horns.
Indeed.
All right, I'm going to take one last break, and I want to thank lynda.com for sponsoring the show. Lynda helps you learn and keep up to date with your software, pick up a brand new skill, explore new hobbies. They have easy-to-follow video tutorials, whether you want to learn how to make the most of your Apple devices, you want to learn about apps, about editing video using Final Cut Pro, building an iOS app, doing audio, everything that you could possibly want to know. Go to lynda.com/iMore. And Peter, I think I was talking to you about this because Jason Snell and Dave Wiskus both use Logic to edit their podcasts, and they've convinced me it is a better thing to do. But I opened it up, and I had a panic response, and I closed it again. So I'm going to Lynda to learn how to use Logic.
I think that's a very good idea, and I've used Lynda over the years to learn some stuff. Lynda.com is a fabulous, fabulous resource for anybody who needs in-depth training about any of the myriad topics that they talk about.
And it is simple. It is easy to use. There's iOS Essential training. There's Keynote Essential training. There's iPad for Business. You can improve your skills. I know some companies just get Lynda accounts for their employees to make them better. That is a very smart thing to do. The nicest thing, though, is that we've worked out a deal with lynda.com to provide you with a special offer to access the entire library for free for 7 days. Just imagine how much you could learn then and how much more you could want to learn. Just go to lynda.com/iMore, start your 7-day free trial. That's lynda.com/iMore. You can get smarter right now. Right now.
Right now.
All right, next question. We're getting there. We're almost done. This is more of a question for debug than it is for the iMore show. Can you use libraries written in Objective-C if you are coding your app in Swift? I have no idea. My background is in design, not development. This is like a Brent Simmons or Guy English or Big Nerd Ranch question. I'm going to take a pass on this one. I apologize. Do we have any other questions? I think that was the last one. So, Peter, the takeaway from me after all this week is we are going to have one busy summer simply digesting everything we saw in June.
Yes. Yes, and I can't say that I'm really looking forward to digesting all of it, but when you are presented with, a 28-course meal, you just have to kind of take the long-term approach to it.
I was watching an old Tony Bourdain show a while ago, and he was talking about how he was fed up with tasting menus because no matter how good it is, you always feel horrible at the end.
Oh, so much for going to the French Laundry with him, I guess.
That was one of my favorite episodes, and whenever I'm in San Francisco, I'm always tempted to see if I can go to the French Laundromat. Although I don't know if that is, maybe not the cool place anymore. Maybe I have to go to like Momofuku or something.
Well, the Tony Bourdain No Boundaries episode that's always stuck out with me was watching him eat off of Shanghai food carts, street carts. I think I went to the kitchen 5 times during the first 15 minutes to look for stuff to munch on, and finally I had to shut it off because I'm like, I am going to auto-cannibalize before the end of this episode if I watch him eat any more soup dumplings.
Do you watch Supernatural?
Yes, I do.
You could have bibbed yourself.
I could have, yes.
All right, so I am really excited. We haven't even covered a lot of the developer tools and stuff because we try to do more, mainstream friendly stuff on the iMore show. But I'm really excited. I'm really excited mostly that developers are really excited that they are interested in looking at what Swift has to offer. I was saying today, Apple announced UK Web View. So previously in iOS you had UI Web View, which is how you did embedded web pages. So any app that had a browser inside it that didn't kick you over to Safari was using UI WebView. But because of security concerns, Apple didn't allow them to use the faster just-in-time JavaScript compiler. So they were a little bit slower. On some websites, they were perplexingly slower. But now Apple's introduced WK WebKit, and this is why I was saying, maybe there will be something beyond sandboxing, because they figured out how to do that securely in a web view. And I can just think of, there's dozens of apps that I use that I will no longer be sitting there watching a blank page, watching stuff, reaching up for the please move this to Safari button. And little changes like that don't seem like a big deal, but they just remove more and more rough edges from things you do many, many times a day.
Yeah, and removing pain points really seems to be the MO for Apple with these new updates.
It really does. I mean, you said it reminded you of the Oprah moment with Craig Federighi. You get an API, you get an API. It does also sort of remind me of iOS 4 with Scott Forstall when he was sitting there going multitasking, blah, 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 and just throwing out all these things that you'd been wanting on the iPhone for a long time, and we're finally getting. And I don't know if it goes in phases. I don't know if every 4 years Apple has, maybe Apple spends several years putting things in place. Like this year they put XPC in place, they put Backboard in place, they put auto layout in place, and then they can do a giant leap forward where everything lands, and then they've got to build up for the next one. Or if a lot of the concern is we've gotten our hopes up now, we've raised our expectations to think Apple's going to do this all the time, and I don't know if that's dangerous or I don't know if that's wonderful.
I think it's dangerous and wonderful at the same time. I'll straddle the line.
Well, I mean, there's obvious things that Apple can do next. Like I was talking about the handing off for games and handing off for media. But as far as I know, for example, Extensibility doesn't sync yet. So if you have 2 Macs at home and you get one Mac set up perfectly with all the widgets the way you want it, everything set up the way you want it, you'll have to go and manually set up that on another Mac. And it's not hard to imagine that one day iCloud will just sync all your Extensibility to whatever machines you want. I would give good money for DocSync to come back. I still miss a lot of the old MobileMe / .Mac functionality that we still don't have back.
It's funny. I remember reading a very long time ago that the perfect user interface is just a big red button that says "Do it." I think that in little fits and starts, we're kind of moving in that direction where these devices will ultimately get to the point where it's just kind of predictive. Figuring out what exactly we have to do, and just trying to make the user experience around that as invisible as possible.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Heard that somewhere. So in case you missed it, Peter and I did a show on Monday last week, right after the keynote.
We were still fresh.
Well, yeah, while we were borderline still alive. It was audio only. We didn't have any video facilities, but that's available for you. We also did an episode of Debug with Guy English, Daniel Jalkut, Ryan Nielsen, and Matt Drance, where we talked about the developer-specific things. We've just done an Iterate designer podcast with Ged Mayhew, Dave Wiskus, and Jared Sinclair, talking about the different things that are going to face designers. Did a Vector with Christina Warren with her analysis of what happened at the show. So there's a ton of material. If you are hungering for more WWC coverage, just head on over to imore.com/podcasts. All of them, Peter, all of them are there for you.
All the things.
All the things. If you can join us live, we are here. We might move the show eventually, but for now we are here Thursday afternoons, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. The best way to enjoy the show is live. You can interact with us in the chat room. You can ask us questions all the time. We are yours well, we're not your dancing monkeys, but we're pretty much yours to ask questions to.
Indeed.
If not, we are available on iTunes, we're available on RSS, we're available in YouTube, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Ours are actually given away for free. I want to thank Peter for joining us. Thank you again, Peter.
Thank you, Rene.
Where can we find you on the internets?
At imore.com and also on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me also at imore.com and all of us at Mobile Nations. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, chat room. See you next time.
Thank you, chat room.